Welcome to Lead Desk, my name is Rob Edwards. In this video, we're going to be creating our inbound channel for calls. We're going to have a look at all the different components which make up the inbound channel, and then we're going to focus in on a few of the detail bits. So we're going to have a look at some of the settings which are important to creating your inbound queue for calls. We will have a look at creating basic flows, although we have a separate video about flows which will go into more detail. And we'll round things off by having a look at the inbound route for calls as well. Before we dive into the application, let's have a quick look at that structure. So it starts with the customer, of course, and they will be calling a phone number which needs to be one that Lead Desk will recognize. It recognizes it through the settings for the inbound route, and depending on which number the customer calls, it will be directed to a different place, usually a different flow. That flow does all of the pre-processing of the call and might actually be a full-blown IVR, a full-blown menu that the customer can interact with before getting to the agent. Once the flow is finished processing it, the call will be passed to a queue and will sit in the queue until an agent is available to answer that call, at which point the call will be offered to the agent. Of course, it can get a little bit more complicated than that, particularly if we are talking about creating a menu system, because we might in fact have multiple queues after the flow, and potentially we might have multiple inbound routes that all go to the same flow. It can be very simple to set up an inbound call channel, but the complexity is there to be made. If you want to get more out of it, then you will be able to. But let's get into the application and see some of this in action. Whenever we create an inbound channel in Lead Desk, we start at the end and work back towards the front. So we will create the queue first, and then we will create the flow, and then we'll create the inbound route. Before we jump into creating the queue, however, there is one other thing that I want to show you first. If we go to the inbound page, we have got a page which is called Announcements. And here you can upload any WAV or MP3 file that you want to play as part of the queue. So when you want to have a message which plays to the customer to say, "Welcome to Lead Desk support, your call is important to us, please stay on the line," you can record that ahead of time, upload that to the announcements, and we'll see in a moment when we do the queue settings how we would then include that announcement into the queue. Let's have a look at that now. In fact, we're going to go to the queues page and we're going to create a call queue. Notice here we do get a reminder that there are associated costs for creating call queues. So bear in mind, think about what queues you actually need before going just randomly creating lots of new queues. The first setting here is whether the queue is active. What it means is that we can set up all the settings, we can have a couple of goes at getting them right and not have to worry about them suddenly going into effect until we activate this queue. So the very last thing we would do for this queue would be to make it active. For now, I'm going to leave it inactive, so I'm going to leave that unticked. Next, we need to give this queue a name, and you're probably bored of me saying this already by now, if you've watched a lot of my videos anyway, but whenever you name something, give it a meaningful name, a name that will tell you what it was when you come back to it 6 months from now. Particularly if you have a lot of queues, making sure that you have a sensible name for this queue to tell you what it is at a glance is really important. So I'm calling my call queue the onboarding call queue. And that will tell me in the future what this queue is about. I'm not going to get caught up on the report identifier. It's only useful for reports and only useful in specific cases. If you ever have a problem extracting information about this queue into a report, you might want to think about creating a report identifier, but most people won't need it. We need to give our queue a priority. This goes from priority 1 to priority 100, where 100 is the highest priority and 1 is the lowest. It is worth noting that this priority exists across all types of queues. So if you have multiple queues with multiple different priorities, the one with the highest number priority will always be offered to the agents first. It does mean that if you have a message queue with a higher priority than a call queue, and a message and a call arrive at the same time, the message will be offered first. I'm going to set this one to 30 just to make sure that my calls always get priority over my messages. Next up, we need to link this to a particular project. We've got a project already, so I'm just going to click the drop down and choose the Omni onboarding project. The join announcement is the one which plays when the customer first joins the queue. The periodic announcement is the one which plays at a regular interval throughout the queue. You have the option of activating the position announcement, and if you do, you can decide how often that message gets given out. If you want to give the customer an option to press 9 to leave the queue, then you can choose a breakout option, have it be number 9, and then choose what to do when the customer chooses it. We could just hang up on them, that seems a bit rude, or we can create a flow to handle that particular case. Maybe we create a flow which automatically creates a callback. If the customer has waited in the queue a long time and just wants to be called back, perhaps we create a flow to handle that. Similarly, we can create a timeout for the queue so that if the customer is waiting in the queue for too long, then we can have that go to a flow as well. And maybe that creates a callback too, or maybe it sends the call to a queue with a higher priority so that we make sure that call gets answered within our service level agreement if at all possible. We can likewise define a maximum number of calls waiting in the queue before we have to consider overflowing. So 1001 call arrives, again, it goes to a flow that we can define here. So the flows, as you can see, are not just about pre-processing our calls, but generally handling our calls in different circumstances. Again, we have an option here for what to do if there are no agents available to take this call. Another flow could be selected from there. How long can a call ring before we consider it to be missed? And how many missed calls is the agent allowed? Those are the last two settings in there. Next, we're going to have a look at agent skills. This is a way of defining what skills are required by an agent to serve this queue. Edit the skills and agents. What skills are required? Let's say that finish is required to handle this queue. And you can see that Rob Demo and Rob Training, both of these have the skill finish on the list. If we want to add Christian here, we can drag him across to the side, and that will automatically allocate him that skill of finish as well. And if we don't want Rob Training to be answering this queue, we can remove them from there, and that will remove the finish skill from that agent. Bear in mind, if he serves other queues which require finish, that would actually remove him from being able to serve those queues too. If we click next on that, it will show us a summary of what's happening here. We're removing the skill finish from the detached agent, Rob Training, and we're adding the skill finish to Christian, and by default just giving him 1 point. And that will summarize that. And if I finish, Rob and Christian are now the two people who can serve this queue. Notice that I still do have to save those changes by creating this queue. Those changes have not been done until the queue is ready. The queue's opening hours, fairly obviously, let us define the office opening hours. What's actually really useful, particularly if you have access to advanced flows, is if we define the opening hours in one queue, we can then use flows to check that queue always to see if the office is open. So that means you don't necessarily have to set the opening hours for queues in multiple queues. If you have advanced flows, you can always use the timing applet to look at your master queue, whichever one is the truth. And then we can use that queue to handle things like public holidays or days when the office is closed because everyone's on a training session, for example. Creating your office hours, very, very easy. Click and drag on one of your days. Let's say we're open 9 till 6 on a Monday. And then we're going to say, actually, it is Monday through Friday. And add that there. And maybe we do 10 to 12 on a Saturday. And because we've set that up, that is now repeated for every week. If we know that we are going to be closing the office for a training day on Thursday next week, for example, I can go to Thursday next week, highlight that particular day's opening hours, click the trash icon here, and say just close them for that selected day. Thursday on the 11th of July is now closed, but Thursday this week is not. Thursday the week after is not as well. Notice underneath here, we can see which time zone that it's using. The SLA here, we can set it. We can set the call percentage we need to answer within a number of seconds. But LeadDesk doesn't really do very much with that information. When we look at reports, you can set your SLAs there as well, so we can see what we met there. We have a couple of clients specifically who use these settings, but if you are not one of them, you can leave it blank. It doesn't effectively do anything to the application. We can automatically create a callback if the call has been in the queue for a really long time. So we can tick that box and say, hey, look, if it's been there for 2 minutes, then maybe we want to create a callback automatically. And we can create a comment for this so that whenever an agent sees one of these callbacks, they will know what it was about. They will know that this customer was waiting a long time in the queue, so we've created this callback automatically. The optional settings here, the last two settings we've got to deal with in this queue, are quite obscure but quite important. We talked about the preferred agent duration when we were creating our Omni project. This says basically that if a customer calls back within the preferred duration, it will attempt to put that customer back in touch with the same agent they spoke to last time in the interests of continuity of service. But if that preferred agent is not available, it will put the customer through to someone else. In particular setups, having this on for calls might cause problems. Perhaps all of your calls tend to come from a single number, for example, so they're always recognized as the same customer, so they always try to put them back to the same agent all the time. In that case, you can turn off that preferred agent duration for calls, and whenever a call comes in, it will just be allocated to the next agent, ignoring the preferred status. And finally, for call queues, but not for message queues, you can define whether we need to create the access rights for this agent to serve this queue. If you don't, then you can untick that, and any agent who can serve this queue will be able to take calls from this queue regardless of whether they have access to the associated project that we used. And then we click Create to create this queue. Oh, I forgot to put the timeout in. We are going to say that the queue's timeout is approximately 10 minutes. There we go. Then we click Create to create the queue. So that queue now exists. For a call to reach that queue, it needs to be directed to it, and that is generally done through flows. So let's have a look at flows. We'll create a call flow, give it a name. As ever, give it a sensible name that you'll remember what it means later, and click OK. The first thing to notice about creating a flow is that the number of applets you have available to you may not be the same as I have. There are two levels of flow access, basic and advanced. I have advanced access, so all the different applets are available for me. If you've only got basic, your applets will essentially be those which allows you to send a call to a specific place, to a particular agent, to a particular queue, or that creates greeting. If you want to get into creating advanced flows, then we have options like the menu, the timing applet, the prioritization applet, which can give you a lot more control and can direct that call to multiple different places if appropriate. We're only going to be looking at basic flow applets in this video. If you want to have more information about the advanced flows, there is a video about those as well. Let's keep our example really simple. We're going to have a greeting to say hello when the customer gets to this flow, and then we are going to pass the call to a queue. It could not be simpler. So we're going to start by wanting to say something to the customer. And to say something to the customer, we use the greeting applet. Notice it's called greeting, but it doesn't have to be. We could use the greeting applet before we hang up on a customer, for example, to say, I'm sorry, but we're not open right now, or I'm sorry, but we're not able to handle your call right now. So the greeting can be just anything you want to say to the customer. You have two ways of delivering this message. You can either have a robot read some text aloud, we'll read that in English, or you can upload an MP3 file of someone saying the thing that you want to say. There are pros and cons to both of these, by the way. The advantage of the robot text, the read aloud text, is of course that you can edit that very easily. You can always just come back into your flow, change what the robot needs to say, and it will say something new the next time a call comes in. In the case of the upload, you'd have to re-record a whole MP3, you'd have to upload it again. It's a bit more involved. Of course, against that, the upload, generally speaking, if you've got someone with a good voice that you can get the recording from, is generally going to be friendlier, it's generally going to be more welcoming than the robot reading it aloud. So really it's up to you which you prefer. The one thing I would note here about the uploads, we had a look at the announcements page earlier. These are separate. These are entirely for the flows only. The announcements are more broadly for queues. Once we've given our greeting, we're going to forward this call to a queue. So we drag the queue as the next step that's going to happen. We drag the queue applet across and we choose which queue that's going to be, which is our onboarding call queue. And then we need to decide what we're going to do in the circumstance that the queue is either inactive, so it does not work at all, or what to do if the queue is currently closed. And both of those things are things you're going to want to have control over. It does say it will just hang up if you leave them blank. I would always recommend filling in your endpoints, making sure that you have deliberately chosen yourself what happens. For example, if the queue is inactive, we might just hang up. But actually what we probably want to do is give a greeting and then hang up, because we want to make sure that we have something to capture the case that the queue is inactive or the queue is closed. So again, I would make sure that I had both of those branches off of there filled in. So in either case, we will try to attach them to this queue. In either case, if it's inactive or it's closed, we'll get a greeting and then we'll hang up on them. As flows go, this is pretty straightforward. Click Save on this. The flow has been saved, and now we can go back to our flows there. So we have a flow which directs the call to the right queue, but now we need to define our inbound route, which will direct the call to the correct flow. So we're going to create the inbound route by clicking on the Create button. We're going to define it as type call, and we're going to choose the number that is available to us. In my case, I only have one phone number attached to this particular environment, and I already have an inbound route for it, so I can't create a new one. So I'm going to go and edit that existing one. And we can say that if the call comes into this number, we want it to go to a flow, and the flow we want it to go to is our onboarding call flow, the one that we've just created. Click OK on that. And now when a call comes into this number, it will be recognized as the inbound route for that. That will direct it to the onboarding call flow. The call flow will pick it up, greet the customer, and then forward that call to a queue. And the queue it forwards them to is the call queue that we created, the onboarding call queue, which is attached to the Omni onboarding project and has priority 30. If we left the setting on the queue, which says that the agents would require access rights to this project, then we would need to make sure that the access rights had been granted by going to the users page, selecting access rights, and making sure that there is a tick for the agent for the correct project. So there we go. That is a lightning look at creating a call channel for your Omni environment. We had a look at each of the components which were required. We had a bit more of a deep dive into the queue settings and a very quick look at flows and inbound routes. I hope that was useful. Thanks for watching. Cheers.